Hello my beautiful bookish friends and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about book terms you should know, especially if you want to start a booktube or a bookstagram or a book talk. This is a series I've been doing and this is the last segment that I have listed. I just did my fantasy book terms. That one was really like a lot of information. Let me move these. That was a lot of information to take in one video because fantasy is very big, very large, and takes up a great deal of space in the book world. But today we're going to be talking about one of the less talked about genres. I feel like there hasn't been like a single one except Heartstopper that has really taken over and a lot of people have talked about, and that is graphic novels and comic books. So one of the biggest things when it comes to graphic novels and comics books is, yes, there's a difference. So a comic book is usually pretty thin, made of like a newspapery type material. Now that's changed as the comic industry has changed. But if we're talking like comics like of days old, then we have stuff like, let me show you here. I have some old comics. We have stuff like these, like the Archie and Veronica really thin comics, and they came out once a week. And that is why, if you're still a comic reader or you're someone who's getting into comics and you see things like the new 52, that is the new DC editions of comics, of their classic comics, because they used to come out weekly. So you would go to the comic shop every week and they'd be like a quarter, a nickel, or a dime or whatever. And now they're like $16. And you would get your new comic for the week. So there would be 52 comics and the whole story would play out over that for like the whole year. And then the next year, new stories would start. So that's why some comics say the new 52. But these would come out in several issues. All the issues would make a story, and they are usually associated with superheroes. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of comics now, but I think when you say like comic book, people think of Wonder Woman, Superman, Marvel, DC, all that stuff, or things like Garfield, and those are more like comic strips, but Garfield, Archie and Veronica, those kinds of things are all comics. So now, graphic novels are a little bit different. They are one story that runs for the length of the series of novels or that one novel. A lot of them are one-offs. Heartstopper is more than one, but that started as like a web comic. So again, it initially started as issues. But even so, the structure is pretty much the same, where you have panels and dialogue and obviously a lot of artwork. You don't have a lot of world building. But you do have a much longer piece of work when you have a graphic novel. And yeah, it just functions more like a picture book than a comic book, if that makes sense. So there are particular elements of comic books that are just for comics, and things that you have to have for them to be considered comics. So first you have to have image style. This is going to be your art style. This is what readers are going to initially look at and decide if they like based on the cover or just if they're flipping through it at the store. So for me, I enjoy pretty colorful art styles. I don't like anything that's really gory or overly realistic. I like there to be some cartoony elements in my art styles. So they're different to every author and illustrator. And their art style is kind of like the illustrator's signature. Like you look at a particular graphic novel or comic and you know exactly who drew it. Comics, especially now with the way that they're set up, where you get like, if you're not doing the weekly issues, because you can still get those, and doing like the bind ups where you get, it's a volume instead of an issue, you can kind of see like issue to issue in it. The art style may change a little bit, and that's usually because now comics are made by teams and it could be a different illustrator issue to issue. Next big element is your words and word containers. This is a decision you have to make before you even do your comics when you're like storyboarding. What is going to hold your words and how are they going to be presented? Like this is choosing your font, your type space, Is it going to be in like little thought bubbles all the time? Is it going to be in like quotation bubbles? You know, superheroes, you might have the bang, the pow, the crash, the boom. Like, are your onomatopoeias all going to be these big words, or are you just going to let the reader kind of put those in themselves? I've noticed a lot of modern comics don't have much as the boom, pow kind of stuff in them. They just illustrate the fight scene a little more graphically, but I think that's because some censorship stuff with comics has gone away. Of course, word to image relationship is super important in comics. You have to decide how you want the flow of the words to match the pictures, and basically just the readability, because that's going to make a big difference between how people feel about your comics and stuff. And these are all things that you would just consider when you're reviewing a graphic novel or deciding how you feel about a graphic novel or a comic, because all these things kind of apply to graphic novels too. But when you're reviewing them, these are all things you want to look at when you go to give it like a star rating or write up a review. So that is basically it, because the basic structures of a comic are the basic structures of a graphic novel. However, graphic novels just have a little bit more consistency from, you know, volume to volume, or, you know, book 1 to book 2. But other than that, let's talk about some of my recommendations for graphic novels and comics. So let's talk comics first, because that was what I first started getting into before I even touched graphic novels. I have some here. These are all DC. I have not really read a lot of Marvel comics. I have one comic. I personally buy mine as bind-ups. So these are several issues put into one. Here I have Wonder Woman Odyssey, which is super hard to find, and I don't think went past 2 of these. But this is my favorite illustration style of Wonder Woman. I think it's amazing. It's also a really fun new version of the story. And then, of course, in the early days of my booktube, I talked about the DC Bombshells a ton. This is the first volume, and this is the very last volume. So you can see how I said like art styles change by illustrator. I think you can probably tell here. There's a pretty big difference between the two. Highly recommend those if you are really into the female DC heroes, because they are all in there. And then the Wonder Woman Rebirth series I love very much, as well as the Harley Quinn. So those are all great options. And then graphic novels, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Heartstopper, considering I have all 4 and I think they're just great. Now, I will say the art style is different than I thought I would enjoy, because it is pretty muted in colors. There's not a full, you know, spectrum of colors in here. Everything is like green and white and black. But I have found that the story is compelling enough that I overlook a lot of the lack of color. And then I have The Prince and the Dressmaker. This one is like full color, amazing, a cute little story that I actually like read through really quickly. But this one is very cute, and definitely one that I would say can be enjoyed by adults and younger readers, but has that fantasy element to it that's not so far out of left field that everyone can understand it and enjoy it, that fairy tale aspects. So that is pretty much it for comics and graphic novels. I think there's a lot of gatekeeping when it comes to comics, and people feel that they can't read them unless they want to like devote their lives to Marvel or DC. That's not true. You can read both and enjoy both for what they are, or any comic for that matter. And you don't have to read every single issue to be a fan. So yeah, and graphic novels, there's so many now. So many novels are being adapted into graphic novels. I'd love to see Blood and Ash be turned into a graphic novel. But you can get so many now, and I think they're a lot more engaging, and they're still actual real books. So don't let anyone tell you that they're not. So I hope you guys enjoyed this series and maybe learned something and can apply it to, you know, just how you digest literature and books and, you know, all these kinds of media that I talked about. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.